Hello, good morning. Just making sure everything's on, and gosh, this is for tall people, clearly. All right, so my name is Kate Platonova. Thank you, Zach, for introducing me. And I will talk to you today about culture and about shifting a very, very established institution. So HSBC is a 157-year-old bank into becoming a data-led financial institution. I kind of reshifted my script, I guess, as I was coming here today because you folks are a professional audience, right? You probably have a lot of questions. You'll probably want to throw some challenges down. So I'll speak for sort of 10 to 15, fly through the content as quickly as I can because I do want to, I want you to have your coffee, but then kind of wake up and get engaged. Culture is all about dialogue. Culture is all about all of us leaning in, expressing our opinions, and forging a path forward together that really describes how we are as a community or as a bank. So that's why I want you to kind of get in there and ask the questions that might be on your mind from your experiences. But first of all, I want to share a story with you. So this is Sir Vanderleer Greyburn. Sir Vanderleer was a chief manager in our Hong Kong branch in HSBC during World War II. And when the Japanese forces were set to take control of the bank in 1941, Sir Greyburn had to make a decision. So the decision he had to make was whether to protect the assets that were in the vaults, the gold and the jewels and all sorts of physical, tangible assets, or something else. What he decided and what he instructed his branch staff to do is to leave all the things that were in the vault and focus on the books of record. So what he asked to do was to hide the ledgers and the customer files and make sure that they're protected at all costs. Money could be replaced, but the data that underpinned our operations was absolutely invaluable. Very tragically for Sir Vanderleer, he was captured and died as a prisoner of war in 1943. But thanks to the bravery of his staff and his decision-making, HSBC went on to survive the war. And with the rescued data, we managed to rebuild ourselves. So 8 decades later, we're still going strong. And the reason I tell this story, and again, if anybody heard me speak before, it is one of my favorite stories, right? First of all, you can't make it up for a chief data officer, right? How perfect is that? But the main thing here is just how important data is for us in banking. It is absolutely ingrained in everything we do. It is our business. And seeing that decision being played out in a very high stress, high pressure, tragic situation, and people deciding that that's what's important is the story worth telling because it showcases that it is a very, very integral part of our culture. So we instinctively recognize our critical assets and we protect them at all costs. And then the second point of this story is banking is the business of trust. You would never trust your money to somebody that you find completely untrustworthy, despite all the recent press and all the things we might have heard about missteps that financial services industry has made. It is still an absolute bastion of trust for a lot of people on the planet. And with that comes a huge accountability for the data people, right? That is what we're keeping safe now. It's not only the gold and the jewels, it's your information. And as we are digitizing at scale, as AI and machine learning takes more prevalence in our life, that's what we have to remember. It is still human beings that have to make intelligent decisions and have to make sure that that trust with our customers and with our peers and with ourselves is not broken. So that's why, again, as we talk about culture, we need to recognize that it's always been there and data has always been very, very prominent. So how did I set out on kind of doing my job in HSBC? Well, when I started my job as Chief Data Officer, one of the things that I've observed is that if I am real about the mission, that I say publicly that we're going to make HSBC a truly data-led organization, we have to make sure that everybody is on their journey in the company, right? It cannot just be the professional data team sort of preaching and everybody else doing something different or not being aligned on the message. And what I wanted to make sure is baked into our strategy is that deep recognition that without the right cultural shift, we can have the best policy in the world, we can have the best platforms in the world, we can have very smart data professionals, but we will not shift the needle significantly. So what I decided to do was to make sure that everybody from board to branch, the entire organization, gets data literate enough to understand how they play into this ecosystem, what is their part of the job. And also they understand the limitations of their knowledge, so don't become too cavalier, call the data professional when you need to. And it's a very difficult, delicate balance, because once you get folks excited about data, they just feel no pain, right? They can do analysis themselves, they can do everything. So you have to kind of educate quite intricately. And one of the places I decided to start was HSBC Board. Normally you don't get sort of to see the board, you get summoned to the board and they ask you difficult questions if you're in an executive role. And for me to kind of reach out was quite daunting, right? I said, look, I want to talk to you all one-to-one and I want to make sure I'm making data topics, analytics topics very safe for you, right? So you can ask anything you want to ask. And it's quite interesting because, again, our board is full of very, very clever people, but once you started having those psychologically safe conversations, they were almost sort of opened up. I don't understand what this means. I don't understand this technical term. And we made it safe to talk about it. We made it simple. And that's one of the learnings that I took, was to make sure that we are not speaking in a highly, highly technical language the way we talk to each other in the data land. We really break it down into business relevant terms and kind of do not assume any levels of knowledge, right? So again, no disrespect, but making sure that we're meeting people where they're at and building them up from there rather than just sort of putting content out and hoping they get it. So the onus is on us as professionals to make our discipline understood by all folks. I've had a bit of experience with that with cybersecurity, so I could be next door in the CISO lounge as well, sharing some thoughts. But that's where I learned that some of these very, very highly complex technical topics, you just got to use different words. You got to use analogies. You got to help people connect to why they should care. Why it's relevant to their day-to-day. And then the other thing that, again, I did very deliberately is I made sure I didn't go in asking for money, because that's another usual thing. Data folks come, they say 3 sentences in highly technical language, and out comes some big ask, right? And now I need X, fill in X million to do something. We need to, again, work harder to make sure that the something is real and people can relate to it, and educate first before we sort of rock up and say, give us a big budget, and really prove the delivery. So that was kind of 2 deliberate decisions. When we got done with the board, we actually leveraged quite a lot of board members to help us develop the strategy that you see in front of you. And the strategy is deliberately incredibly simple, right? It's not because I don't know more complicated words than that. It's because anything more than about 3 concepts that people can memorize and really get behind becomes too much, right? You can have all your technical implementation maps and when you're talking to privacy professionals, you can talk privacy and pets and things. When you're talking to your AI specialists, you can talk about natural language processing, but all of that is unnecessary if you're trying to communicate a message to 256,000 colleagues, right? So this people can remember, they can relate to, they can explain that to their families and to their colleagues, and most importantly, to their customers, right? So protecting our data is part of the business of trust, right? If we don't protect your data, you won't bank with us, as simple as that. So that is table stakes and our fiduciary responsibility. Connect is not connecting, different data lakes across the piece. It is connecting with the people It's connecting people with the right skills. It's connecting people with each other, going to industry events like this, and really absorbing the knowledge and raising our collective data literacy, changing our culture through that pillar. And then unlock value, obviously, is exactly what it says on the tin. That's what we're here for. If you have a well-protected set of data that's clean and well-managed, well-governed, if you have very engaged set of colleagues who understand what they can and cannot do, you can unlock enormous amount of value for your customers. But you kind of have to do it with those guardrails in place. Because if all you're interested in is just unlocking value, but you've built on a very shaky foundations, and the disciplines of, again, the privacy management, data management, quality, all the regulatory requirements are not met, in our industry, that is not an option, right? The regulator will come, and they will compel you to go and pay attention to the protect pillar. So that's part of, again, our Connect story, is to explain to people why we're doing certain things that might not make sense from, again, the analytics standpoint or from the customer engagement standpoint, that it all contributes to a very, very healthy ecosystem. So that's what we've done on the strategy side, and we've been, again, relentlessly driving the communication. We've had Data Week, we had 40,000 colleagues signing up to that. We're driving it, again, from the board down and from the branch up, and starting to develop curriculum that helps people understand how they actually, in their daily life, they touch the data landscape, and they always have a choice. They can make it a little bit better, or they can make it a little bit worse. And we want them to choose the right thing. And it's also about making the right thing easier. So one of the examples I can give you again, because it's all about stories. It's about telling data stories. It's about telling stories with data. But one of the things we've identified, again, for an enterprise of our size, we have enormous amount of change happening in our systems, right, on a daily basis. All this change, finding the changes that are more likely to cause an outage or an incident is not a human possible thing to do. It is a job for a machine learning algorithm. So that's one of the things that we've done, again, on our technology plant, and developed it quite quickly to show our technology colleagues that, hey, AI can play a part in your life. It's not just for the customers outside, it's also for the colleague experience. And we've been very, very successful with that particular model that is looking through all of our upcoming changes, and again, flagging up the ones that a human being needs to go have a look at. That means that 95% of our changes are now more straight through than they were before and don't need to be looked at. So it's quite good outcome. The other example I can talk to you about is resilient supply chains. So we are a bank that is built around the flow of global trade. So supply chains have been really shaken up over the past few years with various events, and we all felt it because we couldn't get certain goods or couldn't get something that we wish to. And one of the things we're doing is working across our supplier footprint, which is quite large, in our customer footprint, to really understand how different factors might impact and create weak links in the global supply chains, and then flagging it up so we can manage the risk appropriately. Again, quite exciting, and making the use of the data that we already have on the pitch quite elegantly. And then one of the other things to obviously talk about is our sustainability ambition. That was another great use case for really treating it as a data problem, right? Because you can't do climate model calculations without right data. You don't have typically in the bank a lot of the data sets that are required to really assess various aspects of ES and G. So how do you get that? How do you get the right experts? How do you make the right calculations? How do you help our clients transition from being in the industries that might not be sustainable right now into something different? And how do we make the planet better as a result? So again, making sure that people understand how fundamental data and analytics are at a very scaled play for our sustainability ambition has been a very, very interesting journey. So I'll stop there and take some questions.
Hi, thanks for that. Neil Taylor from MasterCard. Could you just expand a little on how the Chief Data Office fits into the organisation, and whether that's kind of an influencing role or whether it's a line responsibility?
Whether, Kate, do you have money to actually get things done or not? It's a very good question, because that was actually another story, another journey. So Chief Data Office, historically, so HSBC in financial services is one of the oldest Chief Data Office and Chief Data Officer titles across the piece. So I remember when I was much more junior in my career, going to see Peter Serenita speak and going, wow, we don't have that in a previous bank I was at. So the issue with the previous incarnation of Chief Data Office, it's set under Group CIO, so it's set in technology. And it's not a bad place to sit, but it's a bit outdated with where we're trying to take the agenda. And when my boss called me to say, hey, how about the Chief Data Officer job? I said, absolutely not. And at the time, I was chief architect, right? So I was in technology, and I was looking after data and many other bits. And he said, well, why not? Great job. I said, no, it's not. Because when you sit in technology, you're interpreted as always talking about platforms, right? And as a successful Chief Data Officer, Chief Data and Analytics Officer, so for us, analytics is baked into the word data. It's kind of there, so I don't have that explicitly, but it is full gamut end-to-end, including AI and everything in between. So my understanding of the role was that you need to be able to do policy, and it has to be codable policy, because in my heart, I'm an engineer, so if it's not codable, I'm less interested. It has to do with people and culture, right? So you have to have that influence with the businesses and really speak the business language. And then you do platforms as well. If you're set in technology, you always be the platform person. So I said, absolutely not. It's not set up for success for these reasons. There we go. And what HSBC management have done is they brought the Chief Data Office out from technology, and they placed it as its own horizontal. So I report to the group COO now, and again, it's on par with everybody else. And the difference it made in our life was immense. And I would strongly recommend, if in your guys' organization you're not positioned that, lobby for it, right? It is worth it. People don't get it at first, but they get it when you actually start making traction. And then the second piece is the budget, right? So it does come down to the money, not just influence. You can influence quite a lot of things through policy and through creation of policy and so on and so forth, but you need to have budget to execute. Otherwise, you'll always be the protect and connect people, and you'll never unlock any value, right? Somebody else will go in the business and unlock value. So the bit that we kind of, the piece where we play, my team plays, is anything that is cross-business line. So in the business, do your analytics, do your best, you know exactly what your business needs. The second we start going across and we need to report to the board or to the group executive committee or to Noel Quinn, that's where we come in, because it is pulling together different data sets. And again, it's the hardest job. It's not for the faint of heart, so I don't want to make it sound too fun. But it's worthy, because that's usually the very underserved contingent. So if you look at it, your senior management is probably incredibly underserved for analytics, reporting, any kind of interesting money-generating ideas. So it's a good sweet spot to be.
Hey, Kate. Thanks for your presentation. Kasim Hussein here from Cleveland Clinic, London. I'm keen to understand about any challenges you face on the data literacy front for the branches, because I could imagine that trying to uplift that particular area does come with certain challenges compared to other members of HSBC.
Yes, and it's part again of our effort. You know, the spending time with the board was fun, but we did need the branch and kind of all colleagues in the front line to start getting more literate. So we've launched a training course at the end of last year, and it was mandatory training. So we have a set of mandatory trainings every quarter for the entire company, right? And normally, you know, there's a variety of topics. So for the first time in all of our history, we've had a data topic, very specifically data quality topic. And it was a challenge to make it very accessible. But it's sort of, look, if Kate comes and she says her name and you misheard it and you type it up wrong, and then you type her, or you choose her occupation as the first thing in a drop-down box rather than the correct one. Drawing that link between then, in the KYC process, things will break down. So helping the branch colleagues understand how critical they are in capturing everything correctly, and then how much dependence there is on them by functions after, you know, that happened in the bank. That was kind of one point to make. And then second point to make was that, hey, if you're not sure about data, you know, here's an email address, here's a phone number, call us at data@hsbc.com and ask, what is it that you think you need to know and you don't know? What support do you need? So we really try to open up the lines of communication, because you're absolutely right. A lot of times we're kind of leaving the colleagues that actually deal with the customer a little bit away from the rest of what's happening in the data world. And we also started encouraging folks to raise data quality issues, right? So we're now baking it into everything we do to say, if you see any kind of issue, please raise it. And again, it's a big cultural shift, because what I've also observed is people are actually quite uncomfortable when they see data, right? When you actually show it to them and you go, oh, look how many issues we have. You have a variety of very violent reactions, and they're not fun to deal with, right? It's because people have never seen it like that, and their first reaction is, I would rather never see it again, because it looks like a problem to me. So making sure that folks are calm, and then you start working through, well, what does it really mean? You know, it's not a judgment on you, but that means we can do better. And making it very non-threatening is one of the tricks we've learned.
Karen Ambrose from the Francis Crick Institute. Do you have a concept of data stewards across your institute to kind of help with your business, to help with the education part for your wider users?
We do. So we call them data champions. We just started. Again, and I've seen this actually in cyber, you know, with cybersecurity champions, you kind of have to make sure you've got the right champions that they're really championing. And sometimes what you see is folks will sign up and go, yeah, of course, I'll be a steward, I'll be a champion. And then they get busy with their day-to-day. And there's no sort of tangible evidence whether they're actually championing or not. So one of the things that we're building, along with all of our policy refresh and everything we're doing in Protect Pillar, is surveillance mechanisms. And sorry if I sound a bit creepy, but without being able to measure if anything is happening on the ground, in the organization of HSBC's side, with 64 markets and hundreds of thousands of colleagues, I won't know, right? So I'll be flying blind with no instrumentation, and all of our conversations will become emotional and non-factual. So that's what, again, part of the shift to being data-led is, where is the data that shows me that you're actually championing something? Are you running sessions? Are you showcasing stuff? So that's one of the next hurdles. So we've got them. We're now on that education path to make sure that they're armed with the right level of information. And again, we're making a very clear distinction between people in data professions who are my succession and will do this job forever, versus data curious people who are kind of around and can tinker, versus people in other professions, but they still need to be literate enough. So it's kind of making sure you have horses for courses, very important.
Hi, Ines Ashton from Mars. How much emphasis do you put on the global data analytics strategy versus the local data analytics strategies that you have in your 64 countries?
huge amounts, and I was not very popular. Again, HSBC culturally is not a very kind of centrally run place, I would say. So I've been to other places that are a lot stronger on shared services and a lot more culturally adapt to something central, right? So my reality is when something comes from what we call group, HSBC group, nothing good could ever come out of it, and business people and market people really try to hide from you because they go, here come the useless people with some useless ideas. But to counter that, but at the same time, we're one company traded as one share price, so that's what I'm trying to uplift. So facing into it, explaining that, and then saying, look, we do need the overall strategy that we're all going in the same direction. Again, that's why the strategy was very simple and sort of can't really disagree with protecting your data or unlocking value, right? So we tried to make it not watered down, but innocuous enough that people don't go, well, it doesn't apply to my market. And then there's a lot of work. So we are in the matrix structure. We do have regional representatives and global business and function representatives, and then the kind of the group people in the center. And we're making sure that everything works together. So one of the biggest complaints from the markets is that nobody listens to the reality. They've written some policy, you've sent it down to, let's say, Malta, and we just can't implement it, right? We don't understand what this word means or how to do that, or we don't have resource, and nobody listens to us. You just sort of sent it and forgot about it. So that was the cultural bias that we had to break and make sure that we're really engaged with individual markets. Because the reality is, from a data standpoint, it's the market that gets regulated. So the business can do whatever, but it's the market level regulator that comes in and puts you in a hot seat. So you have to be very mindful about what's happening there. At the same time, again, we can't have everybody to the same standard. So there's got to be kind of a light level of standard across 64 with some add-ons. So it's a bit like Lego bricks. Hopefully that answers the question.
Hi, Paul French from First Central Insurance. I'm interested in how do you go about managing the kind of ethical use of data within HSBC, and also balancing giving people the freedom to innovate with that tension around maintaining governance and control?
It's a good question. So we, again, we're quite non-public about a lot of stuff that we have in HSBC. We have had an ethics committee for past 3 years almost. So again, in financial services, it was one of the first ones. And it is the absolute top of the organization. So it's our global executive committee for all intents and purposes, with some addition, like the head of financial crime risk and so on and so forth, so some other extra folks. I co-chair that committee with our chief legal officer. And what we're trying to do is, again, first of all, promote inventories, right? So without an inventory of use cases that you're trying to do, even if you're innovating and you just have an idea, but registering that somewhere that's lightweight and doesn't interfere with your life is a very, very important aspect of then being able to actually exercise any governance. We have ethical principles that are published. So again, for any especially advanced analytics use case or AI use case, we want people to work through that and ask themselves those questions. And then we kind of have the Daily Mail test, if you will, right? If this was said in this way in the paper, would you be comfortable? Could you stand behind it? What we're finding, interestingly enough, there's not that many gray areas in banking. We're quite heavily regulated. Like, you can't do something completely outrageous without many different other controls and checks catching you. But what we're also finding is some of the newer data sets, and I'll give you 2 examples, are tricky, and the ethical stance on them have to be worked out and have to be communicated then to say this is our bank's ethical stance on that. So one interesting data set is healthcare. So especially with our insurance arm, so wearables, right? Do we take Kate's pulse? Do we store it somewhere? Do we take her sleep patterns? Is it ethical of us to see a pattern in my health data if you're selling me insurance or not? Kind of an interesting dilemma there. And then the other piece that has to do with ESG is especially around modern slavery and those considerations. Again, very, very hot topic, but this scenario that you have to play out, what are you actually going to do? So let's say I find out that one of my integral technology vendors, right, where the platforms are really baked into the fabric of the bank, is engaged in modern slavery practices. Well, what do I do then? Do I rip it out? Do I let the market know? Do I need the regulators to know about that? So it's working out not only what you can and cannot do, but what's the playbook if something is to happen. That's super important. So we do that. Again, there's lightweight governance. And then the second part of your question, how do you let people innovate? I think sometimes we sort of misinterpret innovation for being able to do anything you want at any point in time. So one of the useful things to do is to say, here's a set of platforms, here's a set of tools, here's a set of guardrails. If you're operating within those guardrails and you've got enough budget, innovate away. But we want to see the outcome, positive or negative, right? So if you tested out your hypothesis and it didn't work out, please lodge it, right? So other people don't try to do the same thing over and over. So it's all about that information sharing, and it's very difficult in a big company, right? Because somebody's had a good idea, tried it, didn't work. Even when we work with vendors, sometimes we've tried one for use case XYZ, we didn't write it down, and then they come in to do very, very similar use case through the back door. So it's kind of capturing that metadata about the activity that we're trying to do.
Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you.
And moving from